Hello, fellow faith processors. Welcome to this week's episode of Faith in Process, the show where we explore how real people are actively processing their faith in their writing, in their work, and in their everyday lives. I am your producer, Grayson Freese, and today Harry will be speaking with Millard about tyranny, the prophetic imagination, and royal consciousness. Enjoy the conversation.
Welcome to all the faith processors in the room, and welcome to all of you that are out there processing your faith, listening to this podcast. My name is Harry Jarrett. I am the pastor here at Pleasant Valley Church of the Brethren in Weir's Cave, Virginia, and this is Faith in Process, Sunday's Cool. I like to think that Sunday is cool, and I'm trying to get everyone else to think that Sunday is cool as well, and maybe join us on a Sunday morning for this podcast / Sunday school class or our worship time together. So today we're doing another episode of Millard and Me, and we are going to be talking about some of the concepts from the book, The Prophetic Imagination by Walter Brueggemann. And I've been reading through that book to prepare for a sermon series on the movements of God and the movement of God among us in our worship series. And so I was reading The Prophetic Imagination, thinking about that, and then wrote a reflection paper on chapter 4, which is about Jesus and his prophetic imagination and responding to empire and tyranny and the royal consciousness, which is a concept that comes from Brueggemann's work. Basically means that there is this propaganda that all is well, peace, but there is no peace kinds of thing that's coming from empire or government or whatever king or queen might be ruling and telling the people that everything is well and God is with us. That ends up numbing the populace, right?
Yes.
And then they're like, okay, everything's good. I don't need to worry about anything. God's with us, but maybe not so much. And so thinking through all of that and how Jesus addressed some of those things, and then pulled in also some thoughts and thinking from a class that I took called Outwit that was done by Dana Cassell on addressing tyranny in the world, and whether or not we do have a tyrant in our world. Was thinking about that it's probably more than just one person that's the tyrant, and that maybe Brueggemann had something really profound to teach us in regards to this royal consciousness, and especially in the American context, that isn't just about one person being in charge of that royal consciousness, but maybe it has to do with the civil religion in our culture. Maybe it has to do with an overarching arc of political ideals that I would suggest are not related or singularly owned by any one party or parties, but seem to be undergirding the context of our political, religious, social world. So, Millard, you read my reflections.
There we have it.
And you said, Harry, I want to talk about that. And so I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing.
Oh, it's a good thing.
It's a good thing. So that is my butchered summary of my article that I wrote. What do you have to say about it, Millard? What are your thoughts?
Well, first off, if you all aren't on Substack, this is a plug for Harry.
Okay.
If you're not on Substack, you should actually follow Harry, because that's where I read this article. The article was titled Beyond Herod Comparisons, Practicing Prophetic Imagination in the Age of Royal Consciousness. That's what stimulated this conversation, because I read the article.
You read the article?
I read the article.
Did you know it was my article before you read it?
Yes.
Oh, okay. All
Yeah.
right.
I did.
All right.
There's another article, I just to throw another plug out, that he did earlier on the pursuit of happiness. Is that on Substack?
It is, yes. My most recent work is on Substack.
Go read that one. That was a great article.
True.
Okay, so one more quick plug. Harry suggested several books to us for the upcoming
Yes, I did.
period. For sure, get that one, that Walter Brueggemann, The Prophetic Imagination. I started reading chapter 4, because that's what he wrote the article on, and found it pretty interesting reading. So it's not real heavy, so you can handle it and enjoy it.
It is dense.
It is.
But everyone who is here and all those that you would be listening and reading, you are capable intelligent, smart folks, you will be able to understand what Brueggemann said.
So Brueggemann is talking in that chapter about, he calls it a royal consciousness.
Right.
Which makes sense because Brueggemann is dealing with that period at the end of the king's monarchical. Is monarchical a word?
It is a word, but it's not the right one right now.
But it's at the end of that period of
the monarchy.
Monarchy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, monarchical doesn't have anything to do with monarchy.
I don't know.
We're diverting.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll have to
so
look it up.
Anyhow, he is writing to that period, so he uses that term royal consciousness. I kind of think empire consciousness works better.
Yeah, it's clearer a little bit.
Yeah, for our purposes, empire consciousness works better.
Or we could say democratic consciousness in our context.
I'm not sure I want to go there.
Of course you don't.
We'll develop that theme.
Yeah, but
later.
I mean, that's,
When we talk about the end of empire, perhaps
civil religion consciousness, maybe, or something.
We might do that. So anyhow, the notion of empire consciousness works for me. And I found it particularly interesting because for some time, you people in the class here will remember that I talk about the world paradigm. Well, that's in essence empire consciousness. It's how we tend to think in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you see it's constrained by all kinds of assumptions about how life works, how the world functions, what's real. It's based on lots of interesting assumptions that are not particularly congruent with, shall we say, in contrast, God consciousness. Okay? I think the assumptions that empire consciousness are based on, it has to do, and you can expand because you can be Trip Fuller here a little bit today.
There's no way I could be Trip Fuller. He's pretty awesome.
You can start talking here directly since you wrote the article.
I can aspire to be Trip maybe somehow.
Yeah. But anyhow, so as I perceive it, but I want to let Harry talk a bit because he's the one that really developed the ideas in the article. But anyhow, empire consciousness is based on things like, I got to look out for me. The world functions by power. Power is what keeps things going, what runs things. Money is at the top of the pyramid of things that are important. So it's power, influence, money. Well, comfort, it's really important to be comfortable, et cetera, et cetera. Those are sort of the basis, I think, of this sort of empire consciousness. Now, you want to say some more about that?
Well, I think that what has been new for me is that what Brueggemann talks about, and as I did some work and study on civil religion and how that played into the beginning of America, how things were established, how there was this idea from the very beginning in our American government, divine destiny, appropriating the Exodus story, appropriating Moses into our story of establishment, of being freed from Britain, and we are the chosen people by God to establish this new America, and that Thomas Jefferson and a lot of other folks talked about. As I've been thinking about that and when I'm learning from Brueggemann, for me, this, and I'll be talking about it in the sermon some today as well, what Brueggemann suggests is that when we look to empire, and one of the things that empire tries to say or dismiss is the grieving and the suffering of the populace for the good of our country or our regime or our empire that is God ordained or God destined, then that should be okay. And it creates a numbness of the populace towards true spirituality and true relationship with God. And in our current context of everything that's going on, that idea of numbness is really what I'm thinking a lot about. I think that this idea of the royal consciousness that needs to make sure that the populace feels like the regime that is existing is going to go on forever, that it's going to take care of everything, that it's going to make everything better as long as the populace just continues to support it and continues to allow it to go on, which Brueggemann suggests creates a kind of numbness in the populace where they're not allowed to grieve the travesties that are happening. among typically the marginalized, the poor, the people that the empire or the royal consciousness, they're having everything extracted from them, and somehow that's supposed to be okay, right? And that propaganda then creates a numbness in the populace, and I would also say in the faith people, and in our context, the church, where we're kind of numb to all of that and do not act, right? Bonhoeffer talks a fair amount about that in the believing church and in what was going on in Germany, in Nazi Germany, that the church was numb to all of these bad things that were happening to the Jews, not only the Jews, but to all different sectors of the society that were not Aryan, and that they were numb, and so they weren't doing anything. So I think for me, understanding and getting that framework of maybe what's going on, and that it's not just one person that's doing it, but it's more of a systemic kind of thing that has, I think, numbed me in a lot of cases to doing something significant to address those wrongdoings, really challenges me, I think.
Yeah.
Because when you're numb, you don't see what's going on, or you don't care what's going on, or you very least don't want to do anything about it. And so have we become numb? Are we in a situation where either we're numb to it all, or I think too, another thing that is equally as dangerous or perhaps equally less effective is assigning that this person is the Herod or the Caesar of our day, and if we address what's going on, then that's going to fix it. For example, what's in the news right now, Venezuela. Saturday, military initiative happened in Venezuela. President of Venezuela and his wife were captured. So is that going to fix it? Is that going to fix everything that's wrong in Venezuela? Or is there a royal consciousness that's going on there that regardless of who's the face of the regime, those things are going to continue just in a more different, subversive way? And are the people going to be numbed to that too or not? I'm reeling with all of these thoughts, and I don't know that I have a whole lot of answers, but it is spinning my head in a lot of ways and making me think, okay, so now what do I do with all this?
Yeah, it's important, I think, as you noted, not to point to particular individuals. Probably particular individuals that some people could point out or point at are just a product of the system of royal or empire consciousness. So it's unprofitable to point to those things specifically, I think.
Well,
the whole notion of numbness, I think, is actually encouraging because it holds the seeds to our solution.
Yeah, how do we wake up?
The next time we get together, I hope we're going to talk about the end of empire consciousness. That'll be a fun conversation.
Yeah. Well, you're going to have that conversation because I'm not sure we're at the end. I mean, certainly Jesus addresses it at the time in I think some remarkable ways that I talk about in the article. Yeah, we're not there yet, I don't think. I think it's a constant
The thing
battle.
about the notion about numbness, we're not there yet, but the problem holds the seeds for the solution.
Okay.
But we're not going there. The idea of numbness, I think, is congruent with the notion that we all come to assume that the way things are the way things need to be, right? That's part of that notion of numbness, I think. You have so many folks just assume that the way the world appears to work is the way that the world has to work.
It's the only way it can work.
It's the only way it can work.
Yeah, until the end of the ages and Jesus comes back and fixes it all.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's a common expectation, right?
That's a common understanding. It really is. And I want to work at that, not today.
That I think numbs us.
It does numb us.
That I think numbs us and says we just should wait.
It's actually the case that religion, as it's been thought of for quite a while, it contributes to the problem.
I think it can.
It really can. Like Brian
Bad theology is
Brian McLaren said that, and you've heard me say this before, that religion as it's been practiced is an evacuation plan. It's not a plan for reconciling all of creation to God. And that's what Christianity needs to be. And that's also part of the solution to the whole numbness issue.
And I think Church of the Brethren, Believers Church movements and groups have addressed some of that. And I think we have as Church of the Brethren, we have a framework that draws a lot from some of the practices of Jesus in his day that we try to work at, suffering with the poor and the marginalized, right? Identifying with them, walking together in those kinds of things, grieving with people, acknowledging people's grief and saying, you should be sad, you should be grieving these terrible things. And I think we do, it's one of the reasons I'm part of the Church of the Brethren, is I think we do have a framework that is better poised than some religious frameworks to address royal consciousness and to wake us up from numbness. Now, whether or not we are doing that enough, I don't know. I guess I would say I don't think we're doing that enough. I guess I would say that. So then what do we do? What do we do to try to wake ourselves up, try to wake others up, and say, what is the movement of God among us? How do we join in on that? What are we supposed to be doing here? And how do we not get duped again by empire and by elite religiosity?
Okay. Yeah, I agree. I think that part of the solution of these kinds of things is always introducing or encouraging people to embrace the idea that something else is possible. That's part of the way that the empire consciousness works. Empire consciousness works because it's managed to make us all assume that's how things have to be.
Well, and it does put out there a very concrete, visible imagination of what following through with those kinds of things are going to produce comfort and safety and all those kinds of things. Brueggemann in the Prophetic Imagination talks about these prophets, Jesus being one of them, but more than just a prophet, and how they were very good at articulating what the world could and should be if folks would say yes to God and following God's imagination, God's way in the world. So then, of course, the question is, are we as the church, I would say as pastors, as thought leaders, as leaders in the church, or people aligned with really trying to get in touch with the divine, are we putting out something that is concrete and articulated well enough that's an imagined future that people can say, yeah, I get that, and I'm willing to invest in that. I'm willing to change directions. I'm willing to repent, which just means I'm going to change from pursuing this and going in this direction and going imagined future for me and for people. Are we putting that out well enough? I don't know. I think some of the people I listen to are doing a really good job of it, so I'm excited to listen to them. I think our conversations are helping me, at least.
I think anytime that we can get together and talk about ideas, it's helpful. It's expanding for us. The church needs to, I think, enunciate a new goal.
Yeah.
It really does. I think our vision has been way too limited. And I think we've limited Jesus' vision of what he hoped for, what he saw was the likely results of his message and example.
I think there's times in history where it was getting closer to that, but then it seems like every time that gets appropriated by empire,
And empire, the church can function within the
and
empire
then,
too. Don't ever forget that.
And then we have to do a new reformation of things. And I think we're in that time period right now. We are in a time period of reformation of what does it mean to be a follower of the way of Jesus.
Yes.
Typically, we try to give people a little bit of time to ask questions or comment. Are you one of those people that wants to comment?
No, but I need to say one more thing.
You need to say one more thing. Okay. All right, you say that.
And that is that I'm looking forward to the sermon series coming because
Me too.
I think you're pushing at these notions.
I'm pushing a lot of buttons over the next 6 weeks.
It's time for change, and it is. It's time for a revisioning, and that's what I'm looking forward to with great anticipation. In general, not specifically in the
I think it's
sermon
got to be a
context.
collective effort, right? I mean,
Yeah.
because the body of Christ has to, at least for the Christian church, has to decide what is the movement of God among us right
Yes.
now, and how do we embrace it and not resist it because somehow it's going against our empirical, royal,
Our
democratic
our empire
consciousness, because it is an alternate way,
Yes.
right? It is a kingdom and not a kingdom.
And we might really think about that and flesh that out a little bit about what that really looks like.
Well, that's what I thought I was going to do the next 6 weeks.
Well,
And of course, I will resolve it all in 6 weeks, right? I mean, I'm just going to take care of it.
We've been working
So just
at it
keep
for
listening.
2,000 years.
Yeah, I mean, in 6 weeks, I'm just going to fix it in 6 weeks, and then we'll just go on from there.
All right, questions,
All right.
comments. Don't confuse us.
All right. So that was an awful lot, some of which may or may not have been coherent in some form or fashion. Do y'all have any questions,
Oh, good,
comments,
Frida.
anything? Frida? Okay.
So, Mike, you talk about a goal, and I am thinking of what the Church of the Brethren sort of motto has been, simply, peacefully together. I still see that as where we need to be.
Yes, and I agree. But you missed the first part.
Yeah.
Continuing the ministry of Jesus. Simply, peacefully together. For me, I think that's prophetic imagination. I think that continuing the ministry of Jesus, for me, is a great, simple phrase to pen everything on. Because then it tells me, all right, if I'm going to continue the ministry of Jesus, well, I better darn well figure out what was the ministry of Jesus, right? And what were the things that Jesus was doing? What were the things were Jesus saying? How was he addressing some of these topics? And then I love the simply, peacefully together, because that tells me, the character of what I think I and we are supposed to do. So in this whole conversation, I don't feel like that needs to be deconstructed, honestly. I think that's really good,
That we need to
personally.
work on
There have
I don't think we're fleshing it out.
that. Right.
And I think that how that's gotten fleshed out in some areas has probably become distorted over the years, perhaps. And I think just, thinking about that and maybe some of the ways that it should have gotten fleshed out, we've gotten numb to, right? That's why I like this whole idea of and asking ourselves the question, am I numb? Are we numb? Are we numb to this? Are we numb? Are we numb to what's going on in Venezuela?
That was going to be my second point. It'll be very interesting to hear how the Church of the Brethren in Venezuela is responding to this current.
hadn't thought of that.
I can
Good.
tell you how, because I got an email, and most of us probably did, from the Church of the Brethren today about what was going on. And I'd have to look it up to be more accurate, but the gist of it was a lament of war and this restatement that we have about peace, that, war is wrong. War, even they say, violence is sin, juxtaposed and put into tension with that the Church of the Brethren churches in Venezuela are celebrating that the people in power are no longer in power anymore. So now what? What do we do with that? And I don't know. I don't know what we do with that. But we shouldn't be numb to it. And I think we should probably talk about it. And somehow we have to figure out, I think, how do we have really honest, transparent conversations? One of the folks here last time, I think when we were talking to Lonnie, talked about AA and 12-step programs and how one of the foundations of that is honest, transparent, open conversations about the good and the bad, and how that's transformational. And I was listening. I listen to a lot of things, so I can't remember. Oh, it was Phyllis Tickle in her book, The Great Emergence, that we're reading as part of the series. And she, in that, notes that the 12-step program, the AA, was central in many ways to the shifts that happened in the church in the 20th century, because it said, my understanding of who God is and that higher power and made that a little bit more fluid, less doctrinal, gave people freedom to imagine who God was and what God was doing in the world and what God was doing in their lives. And so that transparency, and what she says is, and the church wasn't doing that and didn't really want to do that. Sort of the traditional church. We don't really want to be that honest and transparent and talk about these messy, nasty things. And so talking about, okay, we've got this premise that war is sin, and yet that's what it took, it seems, or that was the result, whatever it was or not, of deposing this tyrannical leader that was doing terrible things, supposedly in Venezuela. So what do we do with that? And how can we...
One thing and not.
Yeah, well, how do we be honest? And how do we say, well, okay, wait a minute, rather than this is what we think and believe, maybe we need to say, maybe we haven't nuanced that enough. Maybe we don't understand fully, or maybe we need to at least talk about that, and what do we do? Or ask ourselves, why didn't we do something in Venezuela as the church? Were we so numb about what was going on in Venezuela as the church, and we have churches of brethren folks there, were we so numb about what was going on that we did nothing, and this was the only thing that was left to happen? I think those are really important questions to ask ourselves. And we don't do that a lot.
No. Great observation, Frida. I tend to broad stroke things often way too much. I think when I was talking about how the church has failed in the mission, and that's only part of the story. It is definitely the case that there's all these strains have always been in the church. They've always run the Desert Fathers and Mothers, the Franciscan theology, various branches of Catholicism, Anabaptist theology and notions have all sort of carried this notion along. The question is, or the challenge is, to expand this way of thinking from a rather small group of people to the population at large. That's the key. Mm-hmm. And it might be the answer to the war as well, ultimately. But anyhow, more questions, comments?
What is an empire? Give me an example.
Well, the United States is an empire in that we're a large group of people. We occupy a large area of land. We control a substantial amount of the world economy. We maintain a large military, which we have maintained in the past. We've used for good. But anyhow, that's an empire.
But
it's not.
Time we're a constitutional republic too.
Yes,
right,
and it's different. So so when we talk classically, the Roman Empire that had a Caesar who was considered divine, right? Assyrian, Persian empires. So they had a leader who organized large armies and populated, and then they controlled it. So the empire was typically controlled. And I think it's reductionist to say, in other words, it's too small to say that all of the Roman Empire was, say, controlled by Julius Caesar. And there was the Senate, and there's all kinds of governmental systems, and there was governors put in different places across the whole empire or the whole landmass that empire would control. But the idea was that typically that there was one dude who was controlling everything, and that dude was divinity incarnate. Pharaoh, Caesar, Persian empires. We don't really, as the American populace, see the president as divinity incarnate, although if we're honest, that's been thrown around a little bit, right? But as a general populace, we don't see that. So in theological conversations, the concept of empire gets applied to large land masses
and systems of government. That's why I said I didn't like the idea about royal consciousness, because we're not dealing with that at all. And to talk about empire consciousness is a bit of a problem because we immediately go to empires of the past.
Yeah,
but I'm saying what we're talking about large-scale organizations
that control
in the world.
populaces.
That's why I like world paradigm better than the empire consciousness.
That's why I like world paradigm better than empire consciousness. Yeah.
Because it's just a way of thinking about reality. So don't get hung up on the word empire, because it's a.
But the Britons, they have a king and queen, so that's an empire.
We need to look at, we're looking at Venezuela.
Yes.
So we need to look at what Putin's doing too.
Oh my.
Yeah, and the Russian.
He's trying to put the Russian Empire back together.
Oh.
Yes, the whole Tsarist kind of thing. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we need to really look at that too.
So when we're using the terminology empire in theological conversations, there seems to be similar ways of viewing the world, ways of viewing power, ways of viewing the populace, and what the ends of empire are that are sort of congruent or similar threads throughout all of history. And theologically, when we're talking about that, in particular, when I'm talking about that in regards to the Jesus movement, Jesus comes during the Roman Empire, when Palestine is just a province of the Roman Empire, controlled by Roman governors, has this religious sort of side thing going on with the Jewish people in Jerusalem and all of the geopolitical stuff that's going on there. Jesus comes into an empire context, right? So that's why it's important to understand some of these concepts of empire, and addresses power, elite religious systems that are impoverishing people and not really helping the populace, addresses the issues of poor and grief and injustice and all those kinds of things, and does that in the context of empire. So that's why we talk a lot about empire, and then how does Jesus respond to that, and then what should we do in response to empire, in the sense of similar thoughts and patterns of power that are occurring in our day. Maybe we need to respond in similar ways that Jesus did. There's a lot packed into that answer, but that's the best I can do really right now with it. Does that make any sense at all? Yeah?
It does. I just talk about war being bad, not good.
Yeah, I mean, the Church of Brethren says it's sin. So
People have a right to defend themselves.
I think that's a little bit different personally. I mean, what we know is that in World War I, the majority of peace churches, whether that was Church of the Brethren, Mennonite, Quaker, did alternate service. They didn't participate in military service, and moved forward to World War II. 90% of Church of the Brethren males participated in military service. So there clearly was a shift in that time of understanding our role. The position of the Church of the Brethren never changed, the official position, but the practice of the Brethren did. So there's that tension of what do we do with all of that, and what happens when nonviolent Kingian sort of responses, in other words, Martin Luther King kind of responses, civil disobedience, don't bring justice. And that's a whole nother big conversation, which I don't know that I'm fully prepared to have right now, especially since we got to go to church.
Yeah.
Right? So we'll do it again. We'll talk about it more. Huh?
Hear more out of you, right?
Yeah, exactly. We'll do it again. So thank you for everybody being here. Great questions and comments. We'd love to hear more. Wish we could talk more. Grayson and I are talking about how we can have longer conversations. We're going to work on that a little bit. But this has been Faith in Process. Thanks for being here. We are going to go to church now. So have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Faith in Process. Make sure you're the first to know when a new episode comes out by following us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you stayed this long, you might as well share this episode with one of your friends so you can continue the conversation. If you're interested in supporting the show or hearing the full uncut audio each week, pledge a donation of just $5 a month on Harry's Substack. That link is with some other useful ones in the episode description. Even just that small contribution would go a long way toward supporting this meaningful mission as our weekly conversation continues. And you'll get access to nearly 20 minutes of pre-show conversation every week. Are you curious what guests we have coming next? You can find our most up-to-date calendar of speakers at the Faith in Process page linked in the description. That's also a great place to look if you're curious about how you can join us on an upcoming Sunday.